Andrew's title as prince comes from letters patent from George V, and as a child of a monarch. And really only a monarch can then remove that. But what I do detect from all this very much is the hand of the Prince of Wales behind this. I think he's the one who's really been taking a hard line.
I feel like we need to dive into the history of this huge decision by King Charles to strip Prince Andrew of his title and all honours, and that's not to put them in abeyance, that is completely stripping him of them. Let's speak to Nick Serpell, former Times Radio commentator and former BBC obituaries editor, who is very good across the detail on this. Nick, good evening.
Good evening, Kate.
Look, really good to hear from you. First of all, I would love your reaction to this huge decision by King Charles today to strip Prince Andrew of his title. Prince Andrew will surrender the lease on Royal Lodge, so he'll move out of Royal Lodge, move into the royal estate, the private royal estate in Sandringham. What is your reaction to this?
Well, I think it was inevitable, to be perfectly honest. It's come very suddenly. You said there was no precedent for it in the last century. I can't think of a precedent at any time in English history as for what's happened today. So it is quite a moment of history. There's been a lot of talk about him losing his titles, what the king should do, and people have been saying, well, maybe Parliament should get involved. It's not really Parliament's duty or responsibility to deal with something like this, because Andrew's title as prince comes from letters patent from George V, and as a child of a monarch. And really only a monarch can then remove that. But what I do detect from all this very much is the hand of the Prince of Wales behind this. I think he's the one who's really been taking a hard line. And while I'm not privy to conversations in the royal household, I would guess that William has been pushing very, very hard indeed for this to happen.
Yeah, I mean, we've heard that quite a bit today, and it sort of represents the closing of one chapter very firmly, making way for a modern monarchy. I mean, how much do you think Prince William would have had to persuade his father that this was the right thing to do? We've been commenting tonight on King Charles being heckled earlier in the week, and how embarrassing that would have been for him.
Well, I think it would have been embarrassing. I would have thought the king would have been reluctant to actually, what he's done is almost embarrassed his brother in public. But I think that's down to Andrew and Andrew's arrogance in not even admitting that, he might have been at fault in any way. And you made the point just now that he hasn't been found guilty of anything. He's never admitted to anything. But I think the tenor I was getting from his attitude was, hey, I'm Prince Andrew, it's nothing to do with me, really. If he'd have somebody suggested the other day, I was reading, that if he'd have sort of said, I'm going to go off and start working in a charitable area or making myself available to do some good works, that might have done something to push some of the criticism away. But the fact is, he's remained in this mansion on Windsor Great Park. He goes riding every day. You see him driving out his Range Rover. And I think the public are getting this feeling that he's not been held responsible for anything whatsoever, and he just carried on doing what he's doing. And I think that's what's really riled people. And I think William, talk about modern monarchy, I think that's really the direction William's going in, that you just can't have this going on within the royal family. And I think gradually it just built up and built up and built up. Now we have this situation where today, an unprecedented thing in history. I was struggling hard after I knew I was going to be talking to you about whether this had happened before.
Yeah, well, I've got news on that, and you can tell me if this is inaccurate or not quite appropriate. So I mentioned the 100 years thing, desperately scratching through my head to something that happened in 1917, but I've got the detail here now. I've looked it up. So the last time a member of the British royal family was formally stripped of a title was Prince Ernest Augustus, Duke of Cumberland and Teviotdale. Is a German-born British prince under the Titles Deprivation Act, when his British titles were removed after he swore allegiance to Germany during World War I.
Yes, Of course, the royal family were German ancestry, and they were obviously tied up with the Kaiser in terms of being relatives. Yes, they were removed because of World War One. Looking back, I mean, going back a lot further, the usual way of removing anyone who was sort of causing embarrassment to the family or upsetting the monarch was just to have them executed. I look back that the last brother of a monarch who actually was executed was the Duke of Clarence, who you will remember, Kate. Or you remember this? He allegedly drowned in a butt of Malmsey. He was the brother of Edward IV during the War of the Roses, when everyone was plotting against everybody else. And although he wasn't a prince, he was the brother of a king. And he was found guilty of treason and allegedly drowned in jail. So he's the only one that I can actually find within the British royal family that suffered a fate worse. Well, I was going to say a fate worse than death, but he's actually suffered death in actual fact. But this is a huge story for the royal family.
Yeah.
And I think it's something that I get the feeling most people are not going to be that surprised by it, to be perfectly honest. We were moving in this direction with losing the Duke of York, the Garter going. What was left? The Prince, really. And I think they finally took the decision, and maybe the king being heckled had something to do with it.
I mean, this is... Go on, sorry.
The decision was made before then, I think.
I mean, I was going to say this is the royal family working on a pretty sort of quick turnover of news agenda, because they don't normally move this quickly or this dramatically, almost as if actually the decision to put some of his titles, like the Duke of York, in abeyance was seen after that decision was announced as just not enough. So, clearly something's happened between those titles going in abeyance to the king stepping in and actually saying, I've started the formal proceedings to remove the title of prince and all titles, honours, etc. So, clearly something has happened between those times. Otherwise, they would just have gone straight to the sort of chopping block, wouldn't they?
Well, yes. I mean, I've had lots of dealings with the palace over the years, and they don't give out a lot of information, even when there's something important to say. I think I can only. I mean, Kate, like you, I can only begin to imagine the discussions that have been going on in the palace and amongst the royal family over the last 2 or 3 weeks, ever since the titles were put into abeyance. Was that enough? And I think what happened was that somebody, possibly, and I'm only guessing here, somebody sort of said, we need to be a bit cautious about this. Removing the title of prince that's it. That's something that is really beyond the pale for some people. And they would have said, let's do the abeyance thing first. Let's remove the Duke of York. Let's see what happens. And of course, it didn't go away, did it? And they were left then with this situation where the only thing they could do, and I think they were looking at all the other things that could have happened. It obviously wasn't, he couldn't have stayed in that house, for instance. I don't know what the arrangements are, but he's supposed to have had a lease. But the thought that this guy was living in this huge mansion at a peppercorn rent wasn't going down too well. And I think people in the royal household begin to say, this isn't looking good, we've got to take more steps to do it. And I think maybe eventually the king was persuaded. Yes,
absolutely that. I wonder how Prince Andrew goes about his life now. I mean, he seems to have been, certainly Kinsey Schofield saying that there are rumours that he's even had sort of shooting parties. And as you say, at the very least, we know he's been out and about on the Windsor estate, driving his car, etc., etc. But effectively now he is a private citizen, and he doesn't. Well, he won't enjoy any privilege apart from the king covering his rent. We understand that he's going to Wood Farm, where his father lived. That's what Data McAndrews told us. We know he'll definitely be on the private Sandringham estate. I mean, does he have to live? I mean, he probably lives as a recluse anyway, doesn't he? But he won't come into contact with many people, will he? Now he'll have to stay burrowed away.
Well, I wouldn't have thought that many people want to be in contact with him, or certainly publicly in contact with him. I mean, his only source of income actually is his Royal Navy pension, and which the last figure I saw for that was around 20,000 a year, which, for someone of his standing is not very much money at all. I know a lot of people do live on that sort of money, but it's not something that goes with Andrew's whole persona, does it? He's loved the trappings of royalty. He's loved being able to sort of drive around in his car and one thing and another. I wonder whether he might end up leaving the UK altogether and living abroad. I don't know. But I sort of feel that he is quite an arrogant individual. And I think whatever happens to him, he will still feel that it was unjust. That's my reading of his character, rightly or wrongly.
Yeah, I mean, it does say that he sort of willingly has willingly left Royal Lodge. He didn't object to the King's decision, but that's what we would be told, I suppose, isn't it?
Well, it's like the statement when he was stepping back from being Duke of York. It was, I thought I'd do the best for my family, and I read this and I thought someone's written that for him.
Yeah. Look, we must leave it there for time, but it's been so fascinating speaking to you. Thank you for joining us, Nick Serpell, former Times Radio commentator and former BBC obituaries editor, and an absolute expert at royal history and context as well, which you've added to our conversation very admirably indeed. Nick, good to have you with us. Thank you.